On a quiet residential street in Zagreb, Croatia, an ordinary apartment hid a secret so disturbing, so haunting, that even seasoned investigators would later describe it as frozen time. It began, like most tragedies, with silence, the kind of silence people get used to without ever questioning it. A woman named Hedviga Golik lived alone in that apartment, and for more than 40 years, no one knocked on her door, no one checked in, and no one wondered why she stopped answering her mail. For decades, the world moved forward, generations came and went, and life in Zagreb continued as if nothing had happened. Yet inside that locked apartment, Hedviga remained exactly where she had last been seen, sitting in her armchair, facing the television, a cup of tea beside her, and the stillness of decades around her. Her story is not a story about a spectacular crime or a dramatic disappearance. It is a story about a woman who died, and the world simply never noticed. Before we go any further, please hit like so more people can see this case, and subscribe to the channel with all notifications on, so you never miss a cold case investigation. And let us know in the comments where you're watching from. To understand how such an impossible scenario could happen, a human being dying in her home and remaining undiscovered for 42 years, we must step back to the world Hedviga lived in before everything went silent. Zagreb in the late 1960s and early 1970s was a city in transition. People worked long hours, neighbors kept to themselves, and social connections often faded as life became busier. Hedviga herself was described as quiet, private, and somewhat withdrawn. Born in the early 1930s, she had lived through the uncertainty of war, economic hardship, and social fragmentation. People who knew her described her as polite but distant, someone who didn't form deep friendships or rely on others. Her family connections, if there were any, had weakened over the years. On the night she is believed to have died, nothing unusual was happening. It was an ordinary evening in an ordinary apartment. Investigators later found a cup of tea on the table beside her. The television was still in front of her armchair, a model from the late 1960s. The scene looked less like death and more like a person who had simply paused for a moment and never unpaused. There were no signs of forced entry, no evidence of violence, no struggle, no broken objects, no indication of wrongdoing. She may have suffered a sudden medical event, a heart attack, a stroke, but due to the extreme decomposition, the true cause of death could never be determined. The question haunting investigators and the public was not how she died, but how it was possible that no one noticed for more than 4 decades. The answer, painfully, was in the details of her life. Hedviga had little social contact. There were no children checking in, no close relatives, no spouse, no daily visitors. The neighbors assumed she had moved away, perhaps emigrated, as many Croatians did in those years. The building managers rotated, paperwork was misplaced over time, and everyone assumed someone else knew what had happened to her. Bills stopped being paid, but because the apartment was privately owned and the building was older, there were no automatic disconnections. The electricity had likely been cut many years earlier, but no one raised the alarm. The mailbox filled up, then eventually remained untouched. And the door, always locked, simply blended into the building as the decades changed around it. For most people, the world is held together by the people who notice us: bosses, friends, family members, neighbors. But for Hedviga, the world had long ago stopped noticing. This wasn't a dramatic disappearance, it was a slow fade-out, a life slipping through the cracks in a society rushing forward. For decades, no one stepped inside her apartment. No one questioned why she never returned. Time, dust, and silence sealed her fate. Then, in 2008, everything changed. The building was undergoing a series of inspections, and new tenants were supposed to move into the unit adjacent to Hedviga's. Workers needed access to certain pipes, and for the first time in 42 years, someone knocked on her door with a purpose. But again, there was no response. After checking old records and realizing the apartment had not been accessed in decades, authorities decided to force the door open. The moment the door swung inward, the investigators described an overwhelming sensation, not just the smell of dust and time, but a feeling that the room itself had been holding its breath. The curtains were still drawn, the furniture was untouched, and the layout of the apartment reflected a world that had vanished long ago. And then they saw her, still seated in her armchair, facing the television, her body long mummified by the passage of time, preserved by the sealed environment. The cup of tea was still next to her. The television, unplugged for years, was coated in dust but still a silent witness to the decades of absence. Investigators were stunned. How could this be real? How could a person die and remain there, undiscovered, longer than many nations have existed in their modern form? The autopsy could not determine the cause of death due to the advanced state of remains, but all indicators pointed to natural causes. There were no wounds, no signs of struggle, no marks of restraint. The apartment was perfectly intact. Nothing suggested foul play. The case was officially labeled as a death by unknown natural causes, with no evidence of homicide. But just because the case wasn't a murder didn't mean it wasn't a mystery, and one that cut deeply into the fears of an aging society. For many people, this case represented a terrifying possibility that life could end quietly and go unnoticed. That a person could simply disappear behind their front door and the world would walk past them for decades, unaware that time inside had stopped. News outlets around the world reported on the story, calling it the apartment frozen in time, the woman who vanished inside her own home, and even the ghost of Zagreb. But beneath the headlines and shock, there was a deeper emotional impact. People began questioning their own relationships, their communities, and the ways modern society has slowly drifted away from neighbors knowing neighbors. Many elderly individuals live alone, isolated, with little social connection, and the case of Hedviga Golik became a symbol of that silent epidemic. Investigators interviewed neighbors, but their memories were vague. Some recalled seeing her in the 1960s. One neighbor said she thought Hedviga had moved to another country. Another believed she had sold the apartment. Others simply didn't remember her face at all. For newer residents, the apartment had always been just another sealed door. No one heard anything unusual over the years. No one reported strange smells. The environment inside the apartment had kept everything contained. And with time, suspicion faded into the background noise of daily life. Years passed, and the mystery remained unsolved, not because of hidden killers or missing clues, but because the central question had no clear answer. How does a person disappear from life while still inside their home? What does it mean to live in a society where someone can die alone and remain undiscovered for nearly half a century? Some theorists speculated about mental health, social withdrawal, or estrangement from family. Others pointed to bureaucratic failure, lack of communication between agencies, and urban isolation. But ultimately, there was no villain in this story, only silence, neglect, and the quiet tragedy of being forgotten. If there was any comfort to be found, it was in the fact that Hedviga's story sparked awareness. Communities in Croatia and beyond discussed the importance of checking on elderly neighbors, keeping track of those who live alone, and creating systems so that people do not vanish into the background of society. Her death, though solitary, became a reminder to the world. Notice people before it's too late. What do you think really happened in this case? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, but please keep them respectful to the victim and her family. If you'd like to see more cold case investigations like this, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it so more people can learn about these stories.